Stephen A. Smith is saying he does not want to become an elected official, and David Hogg is officially out as the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. Let's start with Stephen A. Smith, but first, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, and over at Undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. You don't want to miss it. Let's take a look at this clip of Stephen A. Smith on with Jon Stewart. They had a pretty interesting conversation, as you can expect, a meeting of the minds. We can go ahead and roll this video.
Is it something that appeals to your principle, to your morality? Where do you take that interest, and how do you manifest?
People think I'm interested in being an elected official. I have no desire to be that.
And I mentioned this at the top, but I wanted to get this other headline in. David Hogg to depart as DNC vice chair after months of turmoil. That is from the Washington Post, which reports that he is stepping down from his role as vice chair, capping months of party infighting and turmoil centering on the Gen Z activist's pledge to involve himself in primaries and back challengers against some incumbents. The reason that I want to combine those two stories is Democrats right now are obviously wandering through the wilderness. That is to be expected when you lose a presidential election. For this version of the Democratic Party, though, it comes on as a bookend, really, to 10 years, starting with Donald Trump first descending the golden escalator in 2015, which, believe it or not, was literally 10 years ago at this point, with now Donald Trump having retaken the White House and embarking on Trump 2.0, which is a much more, the way I would put it, I was thinking about this recently, a much more comfortable in its skin administration that feels like it's comfortable and prepared and ready to just take action. It doesn't mean that there's still chaos. This is, of course, the one and only Donald Trump. So there's going to be chaos. That much we can at least expect. But his team is vetted and much more prepared to deal with it at this point. So Democrats are left kind of looking around, reeling, and saying, how do we react, for example, when there are protesters waving Mexican flags atop burning cars in the streets of Los Angeles, trying to block deportation efforts? What do Democrats do in that case? So I think both of these stories, disconnected as they are from each other and disconnected as they are from that, they're sort of like the balloons that are like hovering way, way above, but still have some tether to the activity on the ground. That was quite a metaphor, but I hope you'll appreciate at least that it was vivid. So let's get into what Stephen A. Smith said, the full quote, where Jon Stewart asks him, is this something that appeals to the vanity? Is it something that appeals to your principle, to your morality? Where do you take that interest? Stephen A. Smith says, people think I'm interested in being an elected official. I have no desire to be that. Just right there, though, that's kind of a political answer from a non-political guy. You can say I have no desire to be that and still end up running for office. He's obviously been talked about as a potential presidential candidate, which is absolutely wild, slightly more wild probably than Donald Trump, because Trump, as of 2015, had tried to get pretty involved in politics over the course of his career. And I think business is more political just in general because of all of the legal work that you do than sports commentating. Sports as business, that's very political. So it's not to say that Stephen A. Smith knows absolutely nothing, but you can see a business leader jumping into politics more so than probably a sports commentator. Maybe that's me, maybe you disagree. But I actually think this is a very political answer from a guy who's not really a politician, and he's ruling it out, right? Those are the headlines after he made this comment, but he says, people think I'm interested in being an elected official. I have no desire. This write-up I'm reading says he believes his talents and passions, Stephen A. Smith, lie in remaining a commentator who can push back against either political party's narrative without pressure from constituents. He says, I want to be a major player in terms of a voice and a conduit for change. I want to make sure that people know that the BS has got to stop. Sounds like Trump, by the way. I believe white, black, and everything in between, society as a whole, by and large, are a lot of great God-fearing individuals that can get along just fine. I think that the politicians in this country have served to divide us and paint us against one another for their own selfish deeds. And I think that they have contributed to the demise of this country. So I don't mind calling them out at all. Yes, this is Stephen A. Smith saying, I don't have plans to run for elected office. I like what I'm doing. I want to be a voice. But that's always how it starts. So I just wanted to put it out there. The headline saying Stephen A. Smith is like ruling it out is not, I think, what we just saw Stephen A. Smith do. It sounds like he's planning to become a lot more involved in talking about politics and in engaging in politics, and that his political future could just be in its earliest phases, if anything, whether that ends up going into, meaning he goes into elected office, or whether that turns out he, is involved in nonprofit work or formal political commentating where he has a political show somewhere like a Fox. You could conceive of that, or CNN. You could conceive of that potentially. And from there, who knows what happens. So it sounds like Stephen A. Smith is here to stay in terms of politics. And why I think that's interesting from the perspective of the Democratic Party is that they are looking for an everyman. They are looking for someone who can appeal to the country without alienating the base. And the base, the far left base, the base that is more upset with the Trump administration than with the rioters. And I say that in fairness. I don't mean that to be, like, I disagree with it, but I say that in a way that if people have really grave concerns about the Trump enforcement, that bothers them more than a few people rioting because of the enforcement. And so I don't mean that to sound unfair, but those people with whom I disagree, and I think probably most of the country disagrees. We talked about that the other day on the show. That is that's ripe, let's say, for Stephen A. Smith to walk in and say something that's Bernie coded and Trump coded, right? Which is that the elites are dividing us with culture war issues. And again, I'm not saying any of this stuff I necessarily agree with, but I'm saying what, from a political messaging standpoint, could be powerful. The elites are dividing us with a culture war, and it's making us crazy. We have to bring back common sense. That's something that Democrats just don't have a lot of, because Trump has cornered the market over the last decade. While they were expecting everyone to end up being appalled by him, what ended up happening is that people were equally, if not more, appalled by, for example, the Biden immigration policy. If you were in Washington, D.C. during the first Trump administration, conventional wisdom is that the country found Donald Trump's immigration policies abhorrent, right? The kids in cages narrative, people were playing sounds of crying migrant children on their phones at White House briefing. It was not controversial to suggest that the country was slack-jawed at the horrors of the Trump immigration crackdown. But that wasn't the case. I mean, polling definitely showed on specific narrow questions that people disagreed with Donald Trump. But that people are more horrified at Trump than they are with Biden, the Trump policy, than they are with Biden is just wrong. It turned out to be wrong. The same thing was true at the time when you were comparing Trump with Obama or Trump with the potential policies of Hillary Clinton. That's how he ends up winning 2 times. And so that's what Democrats don't have, is somebody who can either agree with Trump on that issue and neutralize it as a Democrat, or can disagree with Trump, but still be coded as somebody with common sense. And Democrats have let Trump corner the market on that by taking people like Joe Rogan. And the part of the reason, I think, is Democrats, the Democratic Party establishment, and this is where we bring David Hogg into the picture. The Democratic Party establishment is much more, it demands a fealty, it's much more rigid, and it's much more cliquey and a sort of impenetrable, tight-knit circle than the Republican establishment is. The Republican establishment pulled out all the stops to prevent Trump from winning the 2016 Republican primary. We all remember that. They weren't able to do it. The Democratic establishment has kept Bernie Sanders from winning twice, and in very competitive races. They ended up with the most centrist candidate both times, in Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, because they thought this is the candidate that is most able to win the election. They've waited their turn, and we back them. We know them. They're part of us. And those were establishment candidates. So David Hogg, for example, is getting pushed out for saying that maybe this is how I'll put it in the Washington Post words. He angered many at the DNC, including Chairman Ken Martin, with his announcement in April that his group, Leaders We Deserve, was launching a $20 million effort to primary, quote, out-of-touch, ineffective House Democrats in safe blue seats. Some DNC members were uneasy with Hogg holding leadership positions in both organizations, concerned that it gave the appearance that the DNC was interfering in primaries. Martin had stressed his belief that party officials should remain neutral in primaries, and DNC leaders rejected a proposal by Hogg to create a, quote, internal firewall. And Washington Post goes on to report about some infighting that ultimately led to Hogg just stepping down, as we reported earlier in the show, based on what the Post was able to find out here. But think about that. He said that maybe primarying out of touch people was something he would do with his group. His vice chair, they want them to be in utter lockstep. And to some extent, that's understandable, right? Like, you don't want somebody in your organization who is also undermining your organization and not remaining neutral. But the DNC is a collection of people, should be at least, from different spectrums of the party, from different parts of the party's own ideological spectrum. And David Hogg, as silly as this sounds, is one of the best things that Democrats have going right now, because he's come out and denounced the selfishness of elderly members clinging to their positions, as we sadly saw the late Jerry Connolly do on House Oversight when it could have been Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Hogg has been very critical of that. He's been critical of the party because it seems as though maybe it's cynical, but learned that's what the appetite is out there for right now. And with that, he's pissed a lot of people off, and they don't have tolerance for it, to the point where he had to step down. It became completely untenable. And Republicans were sort of forced to learn the hard way. They couldn't operate like that anymore. Trump has the most bizarre collection of former establishment people, former angry Tea Party people. It's just a very interesting group, and ideologically diverse group from the conservative spectrum in a way that Democrats just do not have, because there's still so much friction between Bernie world, Clinton Biden, establishment world. And that's a really bad sign, I think, for Democrats, that they couldn't make it work with David Hogg. And I don't know what the right solution is. Maybe the solution was convincing Hogg to step back for a couple of years and just have someone who he trusts do those primary things. Maybe the solution was letting David Hogg run his group how he wanted to. And, just having a little bit more tolerance within your inner ranks for people mixing it up and throwing elbows. But they lost David Hogg, and now David Hogg is free to say everything he learned from the inside, to go even harder against establishment members of the party. So maybe this all turns out to be good, right? Maybe Stephen A. Smith getting more involved in politics is good for Dems, because it shows that there's a palatable centrism that's also anti-establishment, which is something Democrats do not want. It's why they can't have their own Joe Rogan. People used to think of the Democratic Party as like the anti-war, pro-speech, anti-censorship party. People like Joe Rogan and former leftists talk about that all the time. And whether or not the Republican Party is, that's why people left the Democrats. They feel like that's the Democratic Party now. So is a Stephen A. Smith able to come in and just blaze a trail and show other people that they can have a home on the center left, and make common ground with the center right and say I'm calling out the BS? Is David Hogg able to energize the left flank? And now that he's been in the inside, take that and start cooking something up for Democrats that's powerful. I don't know that he's going to be the answer to their problem with young men. I'll at least say that much. But maybe Stephen A. Smith is, who knows? But anyway, all this is to say, some of these what look like setbacks for Democrats, they absolutely are setbacks right now. Maybe they turn out in the long run to be the thing that saves the Democratic Party or helps them get their sea legs a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. There's a lot to consider. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe over at undercurrents.tv if you haven't, for the full premium experience of the show. We'll be back here with more soon.